that I can do on these calls is answer your questions. So if you do have questions either along the way or when we finish, please go ahead and type those in using either the chat or the question and answer functionality that you should see on the right-hand side of your screen there. Just type those in. I'll either answer them as we go, or I will go ahead and just answer those at the end of the session today. So type them in, and I'll go through those at some point during today's call. Other than that, I think we are probably ready to go. We're going to spend a lot of time actually in the app here today. I don't have really any slides for you except for this intro one. So let me go ahead and see if I can switch my screen over to my iPad, and we'll go ahead and get started. And if you have your iPad with you, please follow along, push the buttons with me, and let's all kind of learn how to do this together. So let me see if I can share. Okay, you should be able to see my iPad screen now. And so we're going to start with a couple of basic things. Just first of all, what apps do I need on my iPad and my phone? And if you have an Apple iPhone or an iPad, which you do need an iPad to collect data in the field. So as we're out there this spring, if we have the FieldView drive, that little hockey puck thing that we're going to plug into a piece of equipment driving across the field, there has to be an iPad in the cab with us to receive the data that little hockey puck is gathering. So you do need an iPad in the field. And in order to make that iPad work, we want to have two apps on it. And I'm going to just go over to the App Store and show you here. But in the App Store, if you search for FieldView in the App Store, as I have done here, there are two apps that pop up at the top of the screen. One is what we call the Climate FieldView Black app, and you see that on the top left. And then there's the FieldView Cab app in the top right. You're going to want to download both of these to your iPad. The Cab app is the one that we're going to use for collecting data in the field, but the Black app has a lot of good data visualization and analysis tools in it. So put both of those apps on any iPad or iPhone that you're using in your operation. If you have an Android phone, you're not left out of the game. I'm an Android user myself. And so as an Android phone user, you can't download the Cab app. The Cab app, the white one, is only available for Apple devices, but the Black app is available for any Android phone. So just because you are an Android user doesn't mean that you can't look at all your maps and do a lot of the same stuff throughout the course of the season. You can't collect data with an Android platform, but you can view it. So if you're an Android person, go to the Google Play Store, download, search for FieldView, download that black and orange background FieldView app, and you're going to have access to a lot of information there as well. So make sure you have those apps available. That's sort of step one. Okay, now getting back to it, let's say what else do we need to make this work from a device perspective? Well, now that we have both the apps, what we want to do is we want to go over to our iPad and click on the settings button in our iPad, and just check out some of the things that we have going on our iPad here. So one of the things here is we want to go over to General on the left-hand side, and inside of General, go into the About section. And inside of About, we want to check and make sure that we're updated to the latest version of the Apple operating system. So you can see here my software version, line 2 on the right-hand side says 13.4. Apple put out 13.4, I think even this week. I think it was pretty new here. If you're not on 13.4, you need to be on at least 13 point something. And I just recommend here before the season starts, update your iPad to 13.4. And if you need to know how to update, when you're on that General tab, rather than going to About, you can go to Software Update, and it will check and say, like in my case, it says you are on 13.4, your software is up to date, or it will show you a software update here that you have to download and put on your iPad, and so you can download it and get it there. If your iPad is too old, it might say, hey, you are on 12.7 and you are up to date. That means that you're on an iPad that Apple has stopped supporting. Basically, they won't allow your iPad to take the latest software updates that are available from Apple. And if you're in that situation, you need to get a new iPad. We need to be able to run 13 point something in order to run the latest versions of FieldView. And so if yours is saying 12 point something and it doesn't have an update available, that means Apple has stopped supporting it. Your iPad is probably more than 5 years old. Apple does not allow it to take the latest software updates, and it won't be able to run the latest versions of FieldView. So just something to be aware of there. Okay, the other thing to be sure of also when you're on the screen, the settings screen, is Bluetooth. So there is a Bluetooth category on the left-hand side of the screen. Make sure that your Bluetooth is on. You're going to need to have your iPad have Bluetooth on to be able to receive data when you're in the field. So make sure that your Bluetooth is in the on setting and not in the off setting. Okay, so that said, let's go ahead and go back, and I'm going to go into the cab app. So bottom of the screen, you can see my FieldView cab app. It's a white background with a gray F and the word cab. I'm going to click on that. We're going to spend most of the rest of today's session in here, clicking buttons, learning how to use the platform effectively. So let's talk about, first of all, one of the most important things that we can do to make sure we're ready for planting is make sure that we have all of our field boundaries in the system and that our field boundaries are right. So when I'm in the cab app, I can click over to the field section. It's a button in the upper right. There's only 6 buttons here. It's pretty simple. But if I go to fields, I can see a picture of all of my fields down the left-hand side along with their field names. And what I'd recommend is just scroll through this list and you know the shapes of your fields and make sure that the field boundaries look right to you. Like when I look through this and I see this Abilene one. That's not the shape of that field. Something's wrong there. You know, that's a pretty square field, but the shape that I'm seeing here in FieldView has this big long trail going off to the northwest. Something's wrong with that field boundary. I would want to fix that field boundary before I started this season so that it is accurate, so that when I drive my tractor into that field, I'm going to cross the field boundary. Our system's going to know it. I'm going to start collecting data properly. And so that's one that needs to be fixed. I've also got these things in here. I've got a Bob's field here that has a question mark, meaning there is no boundary for it. I want to clean up those things as well and say that, hey, is that a field that I really have? If so, well, I don't have a boundary for it, so I need to draw one so we know where that field is. So scan through this list, look at your field boundaries, make sure they look right, make sure any question marks, you draw field boundaries or delete those fields out of the system. And if you have any duplicate fields, like I don't think I have any of those in here, but maybe you've got a dad's farm and you've got a dad's place, but they're really the same field. We want to remove those duplicates so there isn't confusion when we start the season and we put data into the right field. So there's an option to merge our fields as well. I'm not going to go through all those functions. Those are all done on climate.com. You have to go to a web browser, log in on www.climate.com, and when you're there, you can edit field boundaries, you can merge field boundaries, you can delete fields that you no longer want, but it has to be on the web at climate.com. And as you look through your field list, if you see things that need to be cleaned up, go over to climate.com. If it doesn't make sense or if you need any help with that, give our support team a call. If there's people that have a lot of questions about this, I can show this at the end today. We can spend a little bit of time going into it. I'm not going to go through it now, but I just wanted to make sure that we started out with that. Check your field boundaries. Make sure they're in good shape, because if you have problems with your field boundaries, it's going to cause confusion in the field. It's going to make for a not ideal data collection scenario. That's sort of step one to making sure that things go well this season. Okay, so that said, let's talk about what we're trying to get here. What's the goal? And really the goal is getting all my records in one place. And let me just show you what that looks like so you have a little bit of context here. So if I go into map and I'm going to look at a field that I was successful at using FieldView on in a previous season, I click this town line in middle field. I can look at my 2018 records for this field, and what I have is I have everything in one place. I can look at a yield map. I can look at a planting map and look at what my populations were. I can look at what my variety map is for that field. I can look at different spray passes that I did and say, hey, what was the application rate of this bean bioforage pass? And I even have the option here in this button next to the house to say, look at a season summary for this field and say, what did I do? What were all the passes that I made in this field this year? And I can see it all in one place. I did spring tillage on March 22nd. I planted soybeans on May 24th. And when I was planting, I put down starter with the planter of 624.6. I went through with a Roundup pass, an early fungicide spray pass, a bean bioforage spray pass, and then I harvested the field on October 15th of 2018. And I can put that into a nice little PDF where this is the story of that field. Every pass, every product, how many ounces, how many seeds, what went down, who did it, what date, everything in one little document that has all the details of that field. This is what we're trying to get to. And so we're starting with planting here, but we can use FieldView to collect all this data for every pass that happens in the field. And this is what we get at the end of the season. It's sort of step one in using our data is just having it all in one place. Now, that said, how do we get there? Well, a lot of the passes we're going to be able to capture by using a 2020 in the planter, or a FieldView drive in the sprayer or the planter or the combine or whatever we're going across the field with, so that we get to this end state of all of our passes captured in one place. But before we get to that, what I wanted to show you was there is a simple way to capture pass data when maybe it doesn't make sense. It's not going to always make sense to plug the FieldView drive into the piece of equipment that we're passing across the field. Sometimes it's just easier to create manual maps. And I wanted to show you that first, because maybe there's something that maybe you're doing a tillage pass and the guy that's running the tractor, he doesn't speak English, and it's just not worth it to put an iPad in there with him with the drive to capture something as simple as a tillage pass, but you want to have the record. Well, there is functionality in FieldView to create manual maps, and so let me show you how that works. So what you want to do is you want to go over to Settings, and inside of Settings, there's an option called Data on the left-hand side. And go ahead and click Data, and inside of Data, there's an option to add field data, or it may say add activity on your screen in the upper right-hand corner here. So follow along with me. Go ahead and click that button. And when you're there, you're going to say you want to add an activity. And it's going to say, okay, yeah, you can add an activity to the system. We'll click Next here. And then you would pick the field you want to add the activity to. And go ahead and you can follow along with me and create something. We just won't finish it, but I want to talk you through the steps so you kind of get used to how this works. So I'm going to pick a field like, this cliff field. And then it says, what piece of equipment did this activity? So if I want to, let's say I wanted to create a planting activity for a wheat field because I planted it with a dumb box drill. It didn't have any rate controller on it or anything, and so I didn't put an iPad in there. I could have mapped it with FieldView, but I didn't. It was done last fall, but I want to have that planting record so when I harvest this spring or this summer, that I've got the record, all the records there. What was planted, what was harvested. I want to have it all together. You just have to pick a piece of equipment that could have done the activity. It doesn't have to be the piece of equipment that did the activity, just a piece of equipment that could have done the activity. And so in this case, if I'm talking about wheat, something that's seeded in pounds per acre, I want to pick a air seeder. Air seeders allow us to plant in pounds per acre. If it's planting corn or something, I'd want to pick a planter, because planters allow us to plant in seeds per acre. But I'll pick an air seeder here for the sake of this example. I would enter the pounds, say, hey, I planted this at 70 pounds an acre. It'll ask me what hybrid I planted. So I pick from my list and I say, hey, it was, let me find a wheat variety, Westbred 9578. Was there a seed treatment on it? I would say no. And what date did it get planted? And I go back here to 2019 and I say it was planted on October 27th of 2019. I hit next, and I'm not going to do it here, but if I click add, it's going to say, okay, I know what the field boundary of this field looks like. You told me you planted it on October 27th of 2019 to Westbred 9578 at 70 pounds an acre. I'm just going to fill in the entire field boundary with a flat rate planting of 9578 at 20 pounds an acre, and that will create a planting map. So I just wanted to show you this because this is something, and some of you guys may be starting for the first time here this spring, but you have fall planted crops from last year. This is a way to create those fall planting maps. Maybe you missed some of your tillage passes from this past fall, or maybe you missed an anhydrous pass from this past fall. You can put all of these layers of data into the system using this manual map creation method that I'm just showing you. All you have to do is pick the field, pick a piece of equipment that could have done it, what product went down, what rate it went down at, and what date it happened. And it will take the field boundary, fill that in, and allow you to have these complete records for your fields, even where it was something you did in the past that we missed this year, or it was something where it just didn't make sense to put the iPad and the drive into the cab because you were just doing a very simple flat rate single product capture, and maybe the guy didn't, or the operator wasn't capable of handling, maybe dad's running the tillage bar and he's just not going to learn how to use this technology. Well, you can still capture his passes using these manual map creations. So that I just wanted to show you, make sure you knew how that worked. And now we'll go ahead and get into how we capture data when we're really using Drive and in the field. So let me just back out of this, and so you can just hit back to get out of that if you were following along with me. Okay, I saw a couple of questions come in. I'm going to just wait on those, and we'll get to those here in a little bit, but just hold on, and we'll get to those in a little bit. So first thing we need to do if we're going to capture data in the field is we need to build equipment. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but basically you can see there's 6 buttons on the screen. One of them is the equipment button. And in order to capture data in the field, we need to go to that equipment page. And I've already set up a ton of different planters and sprayers and tractors in my account. But if you're new to FieldView, this page may be blank. And before we can get started, what we need to do is we need to click that Add New Equipment button at the bottom. And we need to build every piece of equipment that we may be driving across the field this year so that we have the specs of it, we know what kind of electronics are on it, and we're ready to read that data when we get to the field. So let's build a tractor first, because tractor is sort of the simplest thing, and everyone's got a tractor. So I'll just show you how this works. We can click on here, and please follow along if you have your iPad in front of you and you haven't built your equipment yet. Go ahead and build it now so we're that much more ready to go. But I'll click on tractor. It'll ask me who makes the tractor, and there's a whole bunch of choices in here. I can also choose custom if it's something not in the list. But I'll say it's a Deere tractor. I'll pick the model number, and then once I pick the model number, it's going to ask me, is that a articulated, a front steer, or a track steer tractor? I'll say it's a front steer, and then I'll give it a name. This is my, JD, I forget what number I even chose. I could have picked one at random, but 6490. Just give it a number, or a name that will allow you to pick it out of the list. And if you have multiples of the same tractor, if you have 3 John Deere 6490s, you'll have to create all 3 of them here. So you go John Deere 6490, this is my number 1. Sorry, I have to make this number 1. And I'd have to create 2 more of them. You can't just create it once if you have multiples of the same piece of equipment. I'll hit next. It'll show me a little map of what that tractor looks like, because we need to know the distances from that GPS globe on that tractor to the rear axle, to the hitch, and how high it is. These numbers should be right if the tractor came out of the factory with John Deere GPS installed. But if you installed your own aftermarket GPS on the machine, or it's not in the location where it came out of the factory, you'll need to get your tape measure and make sure these numbers are right. And they don't need to be right within a half an inch, but make them close. Get them within a couple inches so that we are, know where that GPS is relative to the hitch and the axle, so we can map things correctly as you're going through the field. But that's about it on tractor. And I hit done, and now I have that tractor. It gets added to my list, and I can go ahead and select it as something that I'm using when I pass through the field. So pretty simple to add a tractor, no electronics necessary. It's really just about giving it a name and measuring some distances. Now, I do want to take time to set up a planter and a seeder, because this is a webinar about getting ready for planting, and I want to walk you through how those work. So I'm going to click Add New Equipment, and now I'm going to say I want to build a planter. So when I go to Planter and I hit Next, it's going to ask me who makes it. We don't really care who makes the planter, because all we care about in order to map is we need to know the monitor that's receiving the data, we need to know the GPS that's feeding the monitor, and we need to know the rate controllers on the planter that are feeding the monitor in terms of what rate we're putting down. So this could be a planter that you made yourself. It really matters about the electronics on it. So, if the planter you have is actually listed here, go ahead and pick it, but there is a custom option as well, and that's totally fine. But in this case, I'll say I have a John Deere planter. Then it's going to ask me my planter model. And so I go in here and I say, oh, it's a 1770 NT. It's going to ask me my frame style. Is it a center trailing, a twin row planter, or is it a single frame planter? I'll just say for simplicity, we've got a single row planter here. How many planter rows do I have on my planter? You can choose custom at the bottom if you've got something weird, but otherwise the common configurations are listed here. I'll go with 24. What's your row spacing? If we're, doing corn, it's probably 30-inch or 22-inch. I'm going to say it's a 30-inch here. What's my hitch style? I'll say it's a 2-point pivot, and I'll give it a name. This is my new 1770, and I hit next. Okay, now this one has, as opposed to tractors, there's a little bit more detail on here because now we're going to ask about the electronics that are feeding this planter. So first of all is planter setup. We'll leave most of that stuff on the top alone, but here you will see it asks about planting display. So when I click in planting display, there's a whole bunch of possible planting displays that might be in this tractor. And, there's all kinds of different combinations of aftermarket monitors and things that guys put on tractors to run their planters. Hopefully the option's here. If your option is not listed here, you can choose incompatible display. And what that means is that, hey, we're not going to be able to read your rate off of your tractor, but we might be able to read GPS location at least. And so there's some ways to map coverage that way. But in this case, I'm going to go ahead and say I have a John Deere 2630. What's my planting controller? This is what rate controllers on the planter. You'll see again, there's quite a few options here. We could say incompatible rate controller if it's something not on the list. But in this case, I'm going to say I've got a John Deere SeedStar 2. A lot of times when I'm working with farmers, I find that they say, well, I don't know which rate controller it is. It's Deere something. Is it SeedStar 2, SeedStar 3, SeedStar XP? I don't know. In that case, you can choose one, go out to the field and start planting. If it's not mapping, just go in here and edit and check the next one and then check the next one. It's going to be one of them if you know it's a John Deere controller. And so you can just, test and see which one actually starts to create a map when you're planting. That's sometimes the best way to do it if you just don't know or no one in your operation knows what the rate controller is on that planter. But anyway, I'm going to choose John Deere SeedStar 2. So pick your display and your controller. Then there's on the left-hand side, you have to click GPS offsets, and you have to go out and take some measurements here. We don't know how long these planters are, and so you'll want to go ahead and confirm these measurements or edit them as necessary. These are in inches, but we want to know the distance from the hitch to the wheel and the hitch to the seed exit on that planter so that we can map your seeding appropriately as you drive through the field with that planter attached. The last thing is application setup. So on the left-hand side, if you are putting down liquid fertility with the planter, we can map up to 2 different liquid fertility passes that are going down with the planter if you have a rate controller on those. So I can come in here and say, you know what, I do have put liquid down, I put starter down with the planter, and it's got a John Deere Green Star rate controller on it, and it's all one section. I don't have, basically the entire planter width is all controlled at the same rate. I can't break it down into sections, so I'm going to leave it as one section. Or if you do have section control on that starter, you can make the appropriate number of sections here. If you're putting down more than one liquid product with the planter and you have a second rate controller, you can do that as well. Say, hey, I've got a John Deere Rate Controller 2000 that's controlling a second liquid product. So basically, as we're planting, we can map seed rate and up to 2 liquid fertility rates by setting the appropriate options here when we build our planter. I'm going to say that I don't have a second rate controller here just to make this a little simpler. So I'll disable that. So I've got seed and one liquid rate controller on the planter. I'm done. I hit the done button and that planter is built. Okay, so hopefully that made sense. Any questions, please go ahead and type them in. But the other thing I want to do here now is build a seeder just to show you how that one works. So I'm going to add new equipment. Say I want to add a seeder. I would do this for anything that plants in pounds per acre. So even if it's a box drill, I'm going to want to call it an air seeder in this case because this is going to be pounds per acre planting. I'll hit next. I'll say, hey, who makes this? Let me just do a custom to show you how this works. I'll say it's custom. It's some old box drill. I hit custom. The air seeder model, it's other now. And how many rows do I have in it? I'll say I've got, 72 rows on this thing. What's my row spacing? I'll say 7.5 inches. It's for wheat. What's my hitch style? I'll say it's a drawn. And will I be using an air cart with the seeder? So if you're using an air seeder with an air cart, you would say yes. And then it would ask, is it a toe between or a toe behind? In this case, I'm saying I'm just doing a box drill, so I'm going to say no air card on this. What's my seeder display? So here I'm going to tell it which display I have on the air seeder. So I'm going to say, hey, in this case, I'm running let's say I'm running let's do something different here. I'm doing a Raven Viper Pro on it. And what's my name on it? This is my box drill. And I hit next. Okay, so now a couple of things here. It's going to ask my air seeder setup. I need to know my distance from my hitch to my wheels, and I'll put that number in here. Then I go over to seed exit on the left-hand side, and what's my distance from my hitch to my seed exit on this? Type that number in. If I am putting down any sort of liquid with the seeder, I can add this and say, yes, I have a rate controller on it. It's the Raven, or this is a dry one. If I'm putting down Raven granular, or putting down dry fertility with the seeder, I can say I have this Raven granular product controller on it, is controlling one product, and I've got, another Raven product controller putting down a second dry product. And then in that case, I would need to have 3 tanks essentially, because I've got two fertility products and seed. So I'd have my tank set up, put that one in there. The reason it doesn't like this, see these yellow dots? Anytime I see a yellow dot on here, that means that something's not ready. We're missing some information, and we're not going to be able to save this seeder yet. And the reason is I have this 0-inch hitch to exit distance, and it knows that I don't have a 0-inch between the hitch and the exit, so I have to put something in there. So I say, hey, it's 24 inches. And then this one I'll say 24 inches. And this one I'll say, what's missing there? Oh, controller. Okay, so now I've got that. I can hit done, and my seeder is saved, or in this case, my box drill. So setting up a planter or a seeder is pretty simple. Just follow the prompts. But you do need to know something about the equipment. What's the monitor? What's the rate controller? And is there any rate controller for any liquid or dry products that are going down with the planting? Because we want to map all those passes and have all that data in one place. Okay, just one note here, things that are incompatible to collect with drive, there's a couple big categories. One is if you have a Seedstar 4 HP rate controller on your planter, the John Deere Seedstar 4 HP. We don't know yet how to read those messages, and we're not going to know how to read that here for this spring. So if you are running a newer John Deere with a Seedstar 4 HP rate controller, you would need to either send that data to FieldView via the My John Deere link. You could use a Map Anything kit where basically we say we can't read the rate and you'll type it in manually as you're planting, or you can data inbox. You can take all that data off a thumb drive out of the monitor and go ahead and upload it after the fact. So there are some ways to work around these situations where we can't read the rate controller. Seedstar 4 HP is probably one of the bigger ones there. And just because I don't know if I covered it in enough detail there, but when we're building those planters, let me just go back into one. We do have something called an incompatible rate controller setup. So you may have a 2630 in the monitor, but you don't have a rate controller on the planter. Maybe there's no rate controller because it's a dumb box drill, or it's just it's a ground-driven planter, and so it doesn't have a rate controller. You can go to incompatible rate controller, and if you choose incompatible rate controller, we can still hopefully read the GPS that's going into that tractor, but we just don't know what rate's coming out of the back. You can still map with drive in this situation. We know how wide the planter is. We know where you are in the field, so we'll create a coverage map. The only difference is you're going to have to tell us manually when you start planting what rate you're putting down. Hey, I'm planting at 34,000 seeds an acre. We can't read it from the tractor. We can still map it if you put it in manually. So feel free to use the incompatible rate controller option there. Okay, any questions about any of that, please feel free to go ahead and type them in. Now, let's get into some of the more kind of get ready for planting things. Once we have our equipment built and ready to go, there's a couple things we want to do on the settings page. And so let's go over to settings and follow along with me here. Go to settings and go to hybrids on the left-hand side of the page. What we want to do here, this is where we build our virtual seed shed. When the operator of the planter pulls into the field, we're going to always ask him, what do you have in the tank? What seed variety or hybrid are you planting? And rather than have him make up his own hybrid names, we'd like to have him select from a pre-populated list that is everything that you've bought that year and all the options that you have on farm. So I've already filled my list in here, but your list may be blank. What you want to do before you get started this season is, if you have a list already, hit remove on the right-hand side for anything that you don't have on farm that year. Like maybe I don't have this Unity Seeds variety anymore. I'm going to hit remove and get it out of my list. And I can go through this list and clean it up and say, you know what, I don't have that, I don't have that, I don't have that anymore, I don't have that. You know, get rid of the things in here that you don't have on your farm anymore. So this list is just the things that you've bought, and it is impossible for someone in your operation to be planting something that's not on this list, because these are the only things you bought this year. So remove things that you don't have anymore to simplify this list for your operator and get it down to a manageable list. And if there are varieties that you've bought that aren't on this list, or if you're starting from scratch and you need to populate your list, click the Add New Hybrid button. It will take you to a list of every commercial variety of every type of seed that's available in North America. It's a very, very long list. And you start typing the number. Like say, okay, I have DeKalb 42. I don't know my DeKalb numbers. I'm not a seed person. But, you know, you start typing numbers into here, and it's going to find every variety in the country that includes those numbers. So if I type enough numbers there, it's going to say, okay, 42, 45. These are all the different varieties in the country that involve the numbers 4245, and so hopefully I'd find it. I'd say, you know what, yeah, this specialty corn 4245. That's something I have on farm this year. I click it and I add it to the list. So that's how you add something to your list here. I can go and say, you know, let's find another one. I click Add New Hybrid. I say, you know, I need 6237. Here's DeKalb 6237. I add it to the list, and it goes into my short list. And this will allow you to put these into so that when your operator pulls into the field, he's only going to see these choices as far as what he can say he's planting in that field. It will make sure that you keep better data records versus the planter operator typing in something of his own and making something up there. Okay, so that's one of them, building your hybrids. Another one you want to do is build your seed treatments. So at the top of this page here, there's an option for seed treatments. And if I go to seed treatments, you can see I've already added some, but any seed treatments that you've bought on farm, we want to add them to the short list in the same way. So I click Add New Treatment. Again, a very long list of all these different seed treatments that exist in North America. And I find something like, hey, ProGrow is something that I have on farm this year. It's going to be some of my seed is treated with it. So I will go ahead and add it to my short list so that when my guy gets to the field planting and he knows that he's planting seed that's treated with ProGrow, he can tap that and capture that data as well, instead of him typing in something, making up his own name, and getting some weird bit of data into the system. Make it easy on your operators, pre-populate these lists. One thing of note, if you are planting with a 2020, the 2020 doesn't support seed treatment yet. So there's not, you could put your seed treatments in here, but you're not going to be able to capture them with the 2020. Seed treatments are only can be captured if you are planting with Climate FieldView Drive, at least for the 2020 planting season. Okay, so that's hybrids and seed treatments. The other one is applications. If you're going to be using this in a sprayer, and I know we're trying to focus here on planting activities, but just to give a little preview, if you're going to be doing spray applications, there's an applications tab on the left. You can go through here and you can build your tank mixes so that the operator of your sprayer knows how to, he can just pick a tank mix and go versus spend his time building tank mixes on the side of the road. I'm not going to cover that in a lot of detail. That will get covered in my other webinars on how to get ready for sprayers, but just wanted to show you that a similar thing does exist for sprayers. Feel free to play around with it. I'll go into it in more detail when we get to the sprayer webinar on Monday. Okay. Last thing here, two last things before we get into how do you actually capture data in the field. I'm going to click the house button here to go back to the home screen on the FieldView cab app here. And one of the other things that you might want to do is you might want to pre-populate varieties for each field. And this is all, again, in the effort to make life easier on your planter operator. And let me show you how this works. So you can go to the Fields button here. And if I click on Fields, it will take you to that list of fields on the left-hand side. And on the right-hand side, you'll see that there's an option to add a hybrid or add a treatment or add an application or add a prescription to a field. So if I have a pretty good plan of what's going to go in each field, I can make life easier on my operator by saying, hey, I know what field, let's pick a field here, across the road. And let me get rid of the stuff. So the across the road field, I know what I'm going to plant in that field. So I can go to the Add Hybrid button here on the right-hand side and say, it's going to get planted to this channel number here. And I hit Select, and that's going to add it to the field. And I can say, you know, when it goes in, it's going to go down with this Acceleron Basic plus Olivo seed treatment. I'm going to have that seed treated with that seed treatment. Now, when I do that, what it does is when my planter operator pulls into that field, it's going to pre-populate the seed and the seed treatment for him. So he doesn't need to select it when he goes to that field. So you can make this almost touchless for the planter operator, where he doesn't need to push any buttons at all if you pre-populate this stuff for him. So just an option. If you feel pretty good about your planting plan, you don't think it's going to change, you have an operator who may not be super comfortable with technology, you can make this so that there are very few buttons he needs to push. If every morning, you know, before he goes out there, you just go ahead and pre-populate these on your iPad for him, he'll have that data pop in when he gets to the field. And I'll show you how that looks here in just a minute. So just something to be able to be aware of. You can pre-populate if you feel pretty good about your planning and you don't think it's going to change too much. You can put it in there. Okay. So now let's get to actually how do we collect data in the field. So I'm going to click the little house button in the upper right-hand corner again to go back to the home screen. I have a fake tractor here, and so I'm going to be able to take my drive and I'm going to be able to plug it in. But let me just show you how this works in case you're doing it for the first time. So let's go, I'm going to go back on my iPad actually to the home screen, and I'm going to plug in drive here. So let me plug my drive in. It kind of flashes green and blue, some different lights at me. The first time you plug it in for the season, it's probably going to go blue for a little while. It'll go back to green because it's going to need to update its firmware. So it'll kind of disconnect and it'll probably spend a couple of minutes updating firmware, and then it'll go back to blue. So expect that to happen if it's the first time you're plugging in for the season. But I'm going to go over to settings here, and I'm going to go to Bluetooth, and my Bluetooth is on, and you'll be able to see in my devices, I am connected to one of these drives because I've already paired this drive and this iPad. They know each other. So as soon as the drive powers on and my iPad is in range, they're going to connect and start talking. If it's the first time that you're connecting a drive to an iPad, you need to make that pairing. And it's just like if you get a new truck or a new phone, you have to go and sit in the truck and make the Bluetooth pairing the first time. Once the two devices know each other, they'll connect anytime they get in range. But if you're doing it for the first time, basically you'll plug in the drive, it'll start pushing out a Bluetooth signal. You'll go to your settings page like this on your iPad, scroll down to other devices, and something will be listed in other devices. And you'll tap that drive in other devices. It'll say, do you really want to connect? You say yes, and then they'll know each other. So I'm sure most of you have done this before, but just want to remind you, the first time you use a drive with an iPad, you need to get them to know each other. You need to make that Bluetooth pairing, and this is where you do it. Okay, so that said, let me go back into the Cab app. And when I'm in the Cab app, especially if I've just paired a drive for the first time, one of the things I want to do is go over to Settings and Devices. So on the left-hand side of the page, there's something that looks like an iPad with a FieldView drive. And I click on Devices. And a lot of times, if it's the first time you're pairing, it's going to say Drive, and it's going to say Tap to Connect here. And sometimes you have to come to this page and hit Tap to Connect to get that little green check mark. In my case, I've already paired this drive and this iPad before. They know each other, so you don't usually need to do that after the first time. I've got the green check mark. It shows that I'm connected, so I'm in good shape. Okay, so now that I'm connected to Drive and I'm basically ready to get planting, there's one thing I need to do before I start collecting data, and that is I need to go to the equipment page and just make sure that the right piece of equipment is selected. So it's going to always default to the most recent piece of equipment that you've been in. But let's say I come to this page and I say, no, I'm actually in the sprayer. I want to go to the equipment page. I look, oh, it still thinks I'm connected to the planter. I would need to go down to my sprayer and say set active on my sprayer. It'll say, do you want to make this active? I hit yes. It'll disconnect with the planter settings, and then it'll reconnect with the sprayer settings so that I'm ready to collect spraying data. So I just want to make sure that every time I get to the field, I go to the equipment page and the right piece of equipment is selected here. So I'm going to actually go back to a planter. So let me go back and say I've got this 1770 NT planter, set that one as active. When I set it as active, it will grab my most recent tractor and pair it with it. If that's not the tractor that I'm in, I can choose which tractor and say, hey, no, I'm actually in this 235 Magnum. Set that one as my active tractor. But make sure that the right equipment ends up showing at the top of the page. Once that's done, we're going to go back to the home screen, hit the little house in the upper right-hand corner. And what we want to do now, the rest of the time, we're going to live on the map page. So once I'm in the piece of equipment, I know the right piece of equipment is selected, I know drive is connected, I'm going to live on the map page. I'm going to go nowhere else. So if I go to map, this is what it looks like when you are collecting data in the field. So I've got the map page pulled up here. I've got a couple of things to pay attention to here. I see some yellow boxes on this screen. Anytime I see a yellow box, I want to turn that green before I start planting. It means that, hey, there's some information missing here, and if I was to start planting right now, I wouldn't have all the information I need to map this data properly. So I come in here and I say, okay, I've got some yellow boxes, and it says tap to enter, so pretty easy here. I tap on that box, and it says, let's see if I can get it to, it's going to make me, well, so there it comes. It's going to ask me what hybrid is in the planter. So first I have to choose the crop. Is it corn? Is it soybeans? Is it, whatever crop it is, I want to pick the right crop from this list. So I'm going to go ahead and say it's a corn crop. And then it's going to ask me to tap to select the hybrids that are in the planter. So I come in here and I say, okay, the hybrid that I have is DeKalb 5192. And by default, it's going to assume that that hybrid is in all rows of the planter. So if that's correct, I could go ahead and hit confirm, and I'd be ready to go with that seed variety. Now, the other thing is I've got this other yellow box that says application A, so I'll tap that one, and it'll say, well, what are you putting down? Application A is my liquid fertility that's going down with the planter. What's going down? I can hit tap to select an application, and I can choose from my list here. So I can say, hey, I've got this starter here, and when I select it, this is something that I built on the application tab, where I can say I have this starter mix of, well, it's not really, it's these two products. I can hit add edit products. I can come in here and say, you know what, it doesn't actually have this 0014 in it. Let's remove that. And it's going down at 5 gallons an acre. So I'm putting down 624.6 as a starter with the planter at 5 gallons an acre. Hit done, hit confirm, and now I've got that starter in the as going down as application A. So like that, I'm ready to go. All my boxes are green, and I can start planting. And what would typically happen, I'm not in a field right now. I'm in my office in California. So normally you pull into the field, and it will say, hey, it looks like you've entered the home field. Do you want to make this active? You hit yes, and you're ready to go. And it does that based on GPS, which is why we want to have our field boundaries right before we start planting. In this case, I'm not really in a field, so I'm going to force it. I'm going to go to this drop down at the top of the page, and I'm going to pick a field. I'm going to say, hey, the Visalia field is where I am. And this is essentially what dialog box you get. If you pull into the field with GPS active, it'll say, hey, do you want to make this the active field? You say yes, and then you can go ahead and start planting in that field. So that's really, and it's just going to confirm, because I've selected a new field here, it's going to say, is this still the hybrid that's in the planter? Because anytime you switch fields, it's going to make sure that you haven't changed seed. And so say, is that really still there? I'll hit confirm. What is my application B? I'll say it's 28% this time, and finish there. But when my boxes on the left are green and I've got the right field selected in the upper left-hand corner of the page, I am ready to go here. This will allow me to start planting. So those are the main things. If you're doing this for the first time, make sure you use the right hybrid. If you are putting down liquid starter, choose it in the application A box and make sure the field is right, and you can go ahead and get started planting. A couple of details on that, some different ways that you can do this that may be a little bit more complicated, but maybe the way that you're planting. When I go to that hybrid box, let's see if I can get that one to click here. So basically, let's say I'm planting along the field and I refill halfway through the field. One of the things that we can't read from the planter here is what seed you have in the tank. So if you go halfway through a field and you run out of seed and you refill with a different variety, you have to tell FieldView that you put a different variety in there. And that will make the map change. It'll show where that variety change occurred so that you can get back to it and say, hey, how did these two different hybrids yield? So if I was planting with 5192 and I ran out and I refilled, when that happens, I want to go in here, tap that hybrid button, remove 5192 as the hybrid, and replace it and say, hey, I've now got this channel variety in the planter, and hit confirm. And what it'll do is it'll start painting a different color on that planting map for that field so that I can know where that hybrid change occurred, find it in the field, analyze the yield with respect to the two hybrids at harvest, and have good data in the system. So that's one of the things to remind your planter operator is anytime you change seed variety in the field, you have to tap the hybrid button to update it so that it does capture that hybrid change. One other thing is here, let's see if I go into this hybrid button again, let's say I'm not planting a single hybrid. Let's say I'm planting, I've split the planter and I have multiple hybrids in the planter. I can do that very easily here. So I've got this channel variety and rather than saying all, I can go in and say, you know what, that's only in rows 1 through 6, or it's in the left half of the planter, or it's in the right half of the planter. I can tap these buttons to turn individual rows on or off, and so this is a good way to set up field trials as well. But I'll just come in here and say, hey, this channel variety is in the left half of the planter, and hit done. And so it says, hey, that's in rows 1 through 12. Well, I'm going to have to pick a different variety that's in rows 13 through 24. So I go and I select an additional hybrid, and I say, hey, it's 5192. It's in the right half of the planter. And now I've set up a split planter configuration where we're going to map accurately where each of these hybrids is going down in the field, even though we have the planter split and one variety in the left half and one variety in the right half. Additionally, I didn't cover seed treatments before, but if I am putting seed treatment down, and again, this only works if I'm planting with FieldView Drive. If you're planting with a 2020, the seed treatment option isn't available to map yet, and they haven't gotten that part figured out. But if we go to seed treatments, I can say, yes, I do have a seed treatment here. I'm using this ProGrow product. I select it, and then it'll ask, is it across all rows? So is it on both of the hybrids in this split planter configuration? Or maybe it's only in the right half, and I hit done. It's only on the DeKalb 5192 essentially here. And I hit confirm, and then you'll see in the upper left-hand corner it says you've got two hybrids and one of them has ProGrow. So it's just kind of reminding you what you're putting down at that time so that as you're going through the field, you can always look at these boxes and say, does that match what I'm doing? And if it doesn't, you always want to go back in and tap those buttons and make those changes. So that's going to be all the buttons that you need when you're planting. Make sure the hybrid is right. If you are putting down liquid starter, make sure that the starter is right, and make sure the field is right. Those are the three things that your operator needs to pay attention to. Now, one other thing that I'll mention that, some different options that are available to you here. There's an edit button in the lower left-hand corner. And if you click that edit button, you can bring different boxes into the panel on the left-hand side of the screen. So you can kind of choose what metrics do you want to see while you're planting. And there's two of them that I think I like to bring over to the left-hand side. Certainly feel free to look through this list and see what you think is useful for you. But one of them that I like is the drop pin button. So I take that drop pin button, you can drag it over to the left-hand side of the screen and say, I don't need a field acres button here, but I'd rather have this drop pin button here. And what that'll allow you to do is as you're going through the field, you see a rock that needs to be picked or something, you can just very easily with a button push drop a pin there as you're going through the field to mark those locations. I like to put the drop pin one over there. Another one that I like is, let's see if I can get this to scroll. Where is this other one that I like? Custom map. And this custom map, again, this is something only for guys that are using FieldView Drive. It doesn't work with a 2020, but if you are using FieldView Drive and you pull custom map over there, what it does is it allows you to create another map as you're planting if there's something that you change on the planter or something that you want to mark that can't be marked electronically through reading off the planter. And let me give you an example. Maybe I'm changing planting depth. I plant most of the field. I start the field and I'm planting at a 3-inch depth, and then I want to change a planter setting and start planting at a different depth. I come in here and say, I want to build this custom map. I hit this plus. I give it the custom map a name. This is my planting depth name depth. And so I give it a name, and then it says, what's this zone? And I'm going to say, well, here, this is my 3-inch zone. So I'll say 3 inches and hit done, and I'll start planting. And so I'll be going along, and I'll be creating a map that's showing a 3-inch planting depth. Then maybe at some point through the field, what I'm testing here is how planting depth impact yield. I go back, I make some changes to the planter so that it's only planting at 2.5-inch depth. So then I come in here and I tap the custom map and I say, now I'm in a new zone, and now I'm at 2.5-inch planting depth, and I hit done. It will, on my planting depth map, it's going to create a new color, and it's going to show where that change occurred so that I can get back to it. I can analyze yield at the end of the season and see how the 2.5-inch yielded versus the 3-inch depth. Basically, anything that you want to map that you can't be read off the planter, maybe it's a closing wheel setting, maybe it's planting depth, maybe it's, whatever it is, you can use this custom map setting to create those maps. Because again, the idea is to say, what did I do? Where did it change? And how did it impact yield at the end of the season? That's what we want to learn, and that's what the custom map can do for you. Okay, I think we're largely through. So that's capturing data. I think that's most of it. Any questions on that? Certainly type those in. I have seen a few come in. I will get to those. But let me just do a couple more things for you just to show you what we're trying to do in terms of using this and some of the results that will come out of it. I'm going to unplug my drive so I can actually get back and show you some of the analysis parts of this. But one of the things that's going to come out of using this system at planting is, if we can go over to back to the home screen on FieldView, there's an analysis tab here. And if I go over to analysis, one of the things that comes out of using the system is at any point you can go over to your analysis tab and you can go over to your planting records and pick a year and a crop. You can say, hey, for corn in 2018, what do we do? This page will allow you to see the planting date for every field that gets planted. So throughout the course of the season, you can keep track of, hey, which fields have been planted, what population did they get planted to, and what date did they get planted on. All the information will be waiting for you to take a look at here. In addition, if you go to the hybrids tab at the top of the page, it'll show you all the different hybrids you had on farm that year and where they were planted. So if I go in here and I say, hey, which fields got 6435, I can tap on 6435. In this case, I only have one field that got planted to 6435, but this will allow you to see all the hybrids you planted on your farm that year, and by clicking on any one of those hybrids, you'll see which fields got those hybrids and how many acres of that hybrid were planted to that field. So it's one quick, easy reference place. By using our system, you can keep easy track of when fields were planted and what hybrids went in which fields. The other thing that I want to show you here is an example of what you want. Basically, I think it's a miss if you go through this planting season and don't make any changes in the field. One of the things that FieldView does really well is it helps you run experiments so you can figure out what's working on your farm and what practices are leading to higher yields. And so I'm just going to show you an example because I think this is really important. If I go over to map, I'm going to look at this town line and middle field that I was showing earlier and just show you an example of what we're trying to get to. Let me go back to 2018. And this is a field where this guy, it's a soybean field, where he did a planting experiment where he said, I want to figure out how population impacts yield. And so he did something real simple. He didn't write a script or anything. He just said, hey, here's as I'm going through this field, I'm going to just manually change population from the cab from 80,000 to 90,000 to 100,000 to 110,000. Just do some different blocks of population in the southern part of this field and see how the yield responds at the end of the season. And so he got his yield map that you can see on the right-hand side of the page, but it's hard to look at that and say, hey, how did population impact yield? But if you take the time to make some changes in your field like he did here, change some populations as you go, getting the analysis done is super easy. I'll show you what happens here. So next to the house, there's a little arrow button. Inside of that arrow button, there's a Create Field Region button. And inside of Create Field Region, we can say we want to draw a freehand box here. And I can just take my finger and draw an analysis box around this planting region. And because I've got harvest data, it's going to break down my yield data by everything it knows about in this part of the field. And one of the things it knows about is population. So it basically says here you circled 47.6 acres, and the average yield here was 72 bushels. Okay. It's going to then break down that average yield of 72 bushels by all the different things that impacted that part of the field. So first it says, well, you had only one variety in this part of the field, so of course that variety made 72 bushels. But if this guy did have multiple varieties there, it would have told him which one won the yield contest. We can see that when we had seed treatment, we made 72.5 bushels, so we had a little bit of a higher yield when we used seed treatment than without. Then we have our soil type breakdown, but most importantly here we have our population breakdown, where you can see that when he planted at 165,000 seeds an acre, he made 71.7 bushels. 156,000, he made 72.2. 147,000, 71.5. 138,000, 71.4. So on and so forth down the list to where he planted less than 85,000 seeds an acre, he made 72.9 bushels. So what did this guy learn here by running this very simple experiment in the field? Well, when he started a low of less than 85,000 seeds an acre, and he made 72.9 bushels. He went up to almost a doubling his seed cost to 165,000 seeds an acre, where he made 71.7 bushels. So he basically got no yield response by spending double in seed, by pushing his populations to almost double. So what he was able to learn here through this simple experiment was it doesn't make sense to seed at higher rates in this particular field, at least in this particular weather year. Now, it might make more, maybe he didn't have enough rain that year. He has context to understand what else happened in that field that year. But at least in this experiment, what it showed him was, let's not push populations because that's not our yield limiting factor in this field. And this is the kind of stuff I'd encourage all of you to do when planting. Don't plant at a flat rate. Don't, plant at a constant speed to the field. Try something different. Try some different population zones in the field. Try doing a couple passes at 8 miles an hour speed versus 5 mile an hour speed. Try a couple different passes at different planting depths or different wheel closing settings and mark those off as you're going through the field planting. Because when you get your harvest map, you can do the same thing I've done here. Draw some circles like I've done and get yield by practice results that tell you, does this practice pay? Can I make higher yields? Is it leading to lower yields? Is it impacting my yield in some way? Get those results so you can take those learnings forward, and you're going to have a lot more fun at harvest if you've made some changes in your planting maps than if you do everything flat rate, single product, no changes. Make changes where it makes sense so that you have these maps to do some analysis on at the end of the season. Okay, actually, there's one last thing I need to show you, and then we'll let you go because I know we're running on top of the hour here. One other thing to know is some map options when you're planting. So feel free to follow along with me here. So let's go back to on the main screen, go to map if you've got your iPad in front of you. Click that little arrow in the upper left-hand corner and go to map options. Map options here, there is the one I want to talk about here is field boundary detection, and there are 3 choices here: prompt, auto, and disabled. So prompt, what prompt is going to do is that's the one that's going to be on default, and what that means is that if your field boundaries are in good shape, and I've talked about that earlier, make sure your field boundaries are good, and they show where those field boundaries actually are. If it's on prompt, what's going to happen is when you pull into the field, something's going to pop up on the iPad screen saying, it looks like you've entered the home field. Do you want to make this active? And your operator is going to have to push yes or no. And when he pushes yes, we'll say, okay, let's start collecting data here. That's sort of the default one that's on there. There's also auto, which means that when he pulls from the field, it's not going to prompt him. It's going to say, I know you're in the home field. And so it's just going to start collecting data automatically. You would not want to use auto unless your field boundaries are very good. If you've got bad field boundaries, don't use auto, but it can make life easier on the operator if you do have good field boundaries. And then the other option there is disabled, where you can say, hey, anytime someone pulls into the field, we're never going to try and guess where he is. The operator's always going to have to pick the field name from the drop-down at the top of the page. Sometimes guys like this because they got a lot of fields right next to each other, and when they're on prompt, the thing is always jumping back and forth between 2 different fields because they're constantly crossing field boundaries. It's up to you how you want to use this field boundary detection, but I did just want to make sure you knew it was available, because as you get out there to the field, you may find that prompt, auto, or disabled, maybe one of them is going to work out better for you, but those are your three choices in terms of how our system determines where it's going to put the data that it's collecting. So I just wanted to show that that's available to you. Okay, I think that's most of what I want to cover today because I know we're up on the hour here, but let's, I know there's been a number of questions that came in as well. So let me go ahead and see if I can get back over to where I can see all those questions, and I'll go through some of those. Okay, let's see here. So I've got one question regarding field borders. Is it a bad idea to make the fields a bit small? On the field health images, the borders around the outside and the sows and the water holes are always red on the image, and it washes out the green and the yellow for the rest of the field. If I shrink down the borders to take those out, the quality of the field health image is somewhat better. Benjamin, I think it's a good idea to certainly cut your borders so that they're not showing roads. You don't want the roads to be there. But if you bring your field borders in too far, where you're leaving out the headlands, essentially, you're going to have problems with this field detection thing that I just talked about. When you pull into that field to start planting, the planter's not going to know it's in the field yet. So in that case, you would almost need to have your field boundary on disabled, where you manually set it. You pull into the field, and every time you start a field, you have to tell it what field you're in. So I think there's a little bit of a trade-off there. I would probably it's up to you how you do it, but I think it's better to have your full field boundary in there. But you are right that on a field health image, and we didn't talk about that here, but those satellite images, they'll capture those field edge effects, and the edge effects do tend to wash out a bit some of the variability that might exist in the middle of the field. So it's a bit of a choice you have to make, but I would worry about recognizing that we're in the right field if we make those field boundaries too small. Question here about, should we set up soybean drills similar to how you set up an air seeder? I ran into some issues with drills not being able to read VR recs in seeds per acre, but rather pounds per acre in the monitor. Anytime you're seeding in pounds per acre, you have to set it up as a seeder. If it's set up as a planter, it's going to require a seeds per acre script. So if you've got a script in pounds per acre, you've got to set it up as a seeder. That's the only thing that can read a pounds per acre script. Does seed that's entered into the FieldView cab transfer over to the 2020 Gen 3 when the iPad is plugged in? That's a good question, Charlie. I'm not a 2020 expert. That's not our product, and I don't know the answer to the question off the top of my head. Maybe someone else on the call here who knows 2020 is better than I do can answer that. If someone wants to chat in or the answer, if you enter that seed list into the cab, does that go to the 2020? I don't know. I'll see if I can find out, or maybe someone on the call can actually help me with that one. Question here about, when pre-populating a field with my varieties, can I add more than one variety and then just choose between the two when I'm seeding? So in that situation where we were putting in, we were pre-populating a field with a variety, you could put 2 or 3 in there. And when the guy gets to the field, it's going to pop up and it's going to say, these 3 varieties are listed as what's in the planter. Is this really what's in there? And then he could X out the ones that are not there and just leave the one that actually is in. So yes, you could do that, but it's going to be up to the operator to, when that pop-up comes up and it says, these are the 3 that we thought were in the planter, he needs to, cull that list and pull it down to just the one that actually is in the planter. So if that makes it easier, yeah, you're certainly welcome to do that, and that would work out okay. A comment here from someone on that auto versus prompt versus disabled on field boundaries. One point here is that the auto detection doesn't work well when 2 fields are sharing the same line fence. And I think that, so what happens is, if it's on auto and you have 2 fields that are right side by side, and you're going along the headlands kind of trying to plant or spray along the headlands, or you're going in and out of one field or another turning around, it's going to constantly flip back and forth. And it can, depending on how good those boundaries are, it might occasionally flip back and gather data in the wrong field. So that's just something to be aware of with auto, is you need to think about what happens when you've got fields that are right next to each other. Let's see what else we got here. one question about here, are you putting planter fertilizer in as an option, as an application also? Yeah, I think we covered that. So as you're planting, you can map, if it's an air seeder, you can map up to 2 different granular applications with the planter, with the seeder. And if the planter, you can map up to 2 different liquid applications with the planter. So you can create seeding and 2 fertility passes all with planting or seeding. If you spray once and it paints it, how do you remove that paint when you spray that field again? So this is a good question also with regards to planting. So let's say we plant a field this spring and we get into a situation where we have to replant. If we plant the field, and we have to replant, as long as the replant comes 14 days later, between 14 and 60 days later, when we go back into the replant, our system will recognize it as replant and it will overwrite the previous planting data for that part of the field. So let's say we plant an 80-acre field, but 3 weeks later we go back and we spot in some areas that got drowned out. That's going to work out fine. You'll have one single planting map. It'll show the different dates, the original plant date, and the places where we spotted something in later, and you'll be able to do all that analysis at the end of the season about how the replant did versus the original plant. It just has to be more than 14 days after the original plant for our system to recognize it as a replant. Spraying kind of works the same, similarly. If I spray and then I go in to spray that field again, it's really about which tank mix you pick and how long. If it's a different tank mix, it'll definitely show up as a different spray pass. So if I spray it once with Roundup and then the next time with a fertility pass, those will be 2 different spray passes in the system. So as long as it's a different pass, it'll be fine. If it's the same product, I'm not actually sure on the timeline. Like if I spray with Roundup today and then I get rained out and 2 days later I go back and I finish the field, I'm pretty sure that's all going to show up as a single spray pass, but you will in the field. I think it would have to be more than, I think it might have to be more than 14 days again before we would recognize it as a different spray pass and capture a different spray map there. One thing with sprays, though, is we don't have a spray date map. So if you spray half the field today with Roundup, you get rained out, and you come back in 2 days later and finish the field, you're going to get one spray map that shows that Roundup pass, and there won't be a line on that map currently showing where the date change was, where you got rained out, where you got restarted. That's something I've been working with the product team to get into the system. I'm hopeful it'll come sooner rather than later because those spray dates do matter when we get rained out and we have to come back. Sometimes that has a big impact on yield. It's not in there today, but it's something that I'm sure is coming. I just don't know exactly how quickly. Questions about, we're doing custom planting. What if we pull into a field that's not mapped? Can we map the border on the outside pass? Yes, and I'm going to get back into the cab to show you that, Jeff, how that works. Question, can you have different applicators listed? I don't know quite what you mean there, Craig, if you mean the operator of the piece of equipment, but if so, I'll show you how to do that as well. Let me just take a note so when I get back in here, I answered the right questions here. Custom, okay. When going through the equipment setup for a self-propelled sprayer, in the GPS offsets, tap a box pop-up saying invalid offsets. Why is this? Okay, so someone must be going in there and they're setting up a sprayer and you're getting a box that tells you you've got invalid offsets. There must be a 0 in there somewhere, Andrew. So when you, on the measurements of distance from boom to GPS or whatever, one of them must be 0, or it's a positive where it should be a negative or something. Something's wrong in there, and so it's not allowing you to save that because it knows that that's not a possible configuration of a sprayer. So it's really about just checking that straight out and making sure that all those numbers are possible. And without seeing it, I don't know which one, but certainly feel free to call our support team with questions there. Speaking of which, I'm going to put the support number up on the screen here for a minute. If you have specific questions about something that isn't answered today, call our support team. There are people in St. Louis that speak English, they know farming, and they are great to work with. And please, call them anytime you have a problem. They are good to work with. Let me see. A couple other questions here. One, manual maps. I went over that manual maps thing where you can go ahead and say, hey, I didn't capture it this past fall, but I put wheat into this field and I want to map it manually. There are some limitations when you're mapping manually. It has to be single product and single rate. If you had a split planter, you can't map that manually. If you had two different hybrids in the field, you can't map that manually. If you had two different rates or a variable rate population as you're going through the field, you can't map that manually. The only thing that we can map manually is we take the entire field boundary and we fill it in with a single product at a single rate on a single date. That's the kind of stuff you can map manually. And another comment here, like if you are spraying and you do change dates, let's say I spray Roundup on half the field, I get rained out. 3 days later, I come back and finish the field. You could use the drop pin functionality to go ahead and mark where that change happened, since we do not have a spray date map currently. Okay, I think that's all the questions that came up. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to share my CAB app once more so I can answer a couple of these other questions that came in about how to do custom mapping and how you can change applicators. Let me go see if I can get this to display, share. Okay, so you should be able to see my iPad screen again. And let's first answer the custom applicators question, or the applicators question. So when you're spraying, we don't capture who was in the sprayer, or when you're planting, any time you go across the field, we don't capture who was doing that, but you can put the data in after the fact. So let me go to a planting map, for example. On this field, I've got my planting map. When I'm in the CAB app, I can click the little arrow button next to the house in the upper right-hand corner. So I click that arrow button, I go to the planting summary, and when I'm in the planting summary, there's an option in here. It'll say, there's the stuff it captured automatically, the variety and the population, the seed treatment information, and it has the piece of equipment that did it, this John Deere 24-row planter. There's an operator button there that I can tap. If I tap in that operator, it's going to say which guy was driving the planter that day. So I can pick him from my list if it's someone that I've already pre-populated, or I can always add a new operator. I put in their name and their license number here, and then they will show up in this list, and I can add them. So I can say, you know what, it was Don that was the operator of this planter. Why did my screen stop responding? There we go. I hit Don, select, and it puts him into the record. So now when I go ahead and create my documentation for that field, here's my planting report. Soybeans planted on May 24th, this variety, this seed treatment, and Don Perone was the guy in the planter. Same thing with sprayer. If I go to a spray pass and I say, hey, this is my spray pass, I can go to my, pull up my spray pass on the screen. I can use the arrow button to go to my application summary, and here's all my products, my EPA registration numbers, and I can choose which operator and what his license number is for that, who was doing that particular pass. So it's all done after the fact. Once the field is done, you can go in and add that to the report for that particular pass on the field. So hopefully that answers that question. The other question that came in was about, let's say I'm custom planting, custom spraying, doing something in a field that's not mine. How do I do it? Because I don't have that field boundary existing in my system. If you're doing custom work, what you'll want to do is you'll go to Fields. Before you start that field, you'll go to Fields, and you'll go to Add a New Field at the bottom of the left-hand side of the page. So left-hand side of the page, there's an Add New Field button. Click that. Give the field a name. This is Dan's West Field. The field name does not need to match what the client calls it. You just got to name it something so that you know which one it is when you're done with it. So give it a name. It does not need to be what the client actually calls it. Put in a client farm field structure, so which client, which farm, whatever, and hit add. It's going to show that, okay, now I've got Dan's West as one of my potential fields, and it's got a question mark on it saying, I don't know what the boundary of this field looks like, but I know there's a field named Dan's West out there. So with that done, then I can go back to the home in the upper right-hand corner of the screen, and I can go to map to try and start collecting the data. So now I want to collect data in Dan's field, but since I don't know where it is, whether I have this on auto or prompt, when I pull into that field, it's not going to know I'm there because I don't know what the field boundary looks like. So I'm going to have to force it. I'm going to go into select field, and I have to pick Dan's field from my list. I go and say Dan's West, here it is, and I say, I'm going to force it to be Dan's West. And it says, do you want to make this the active field? I say yes, and it doesn't really know where it is, but it's going to go ahead based on my current GPS and just start mapping. So it asks me, hey, what's in the planter? I'm going to say yes, those are the products. And now I can go ahead and I can start planting, and it will draw a field boundary based on where I drive in that field with the planter or the sprayer or whatever. So if you are doing custom work, go to Fields, hit the Add New Field button at the bottom to create a new field, and then manually select that field name from the drop-down when you are on the Maps page. Okay, let's see if anything else has come in. I think that looks like all the questions that have come in. So hope that was helpful today. Appreciate everyone taking the time. Hope you're that much more ready for getting ready going this spring. Please call support with any questions. If you have questions for me, I've been at FieldView since we started this thing, so I have the real simple email address of jeff@climate.com, because when we started, we said, hey, there's never going to be another Jeff at this company, and lo and behold, we actually got a little bit bigger, and there are more, but I'm the original one. So I'm jeff@climate.com. Send me a note. I'd be happy to help as well. Thanks, everyone. Best of luck this spring, and we look forward to working with you on a successful year. Thanks very much.